Thank you everybody so much for joining us at today's Art Talk. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out and indulging me and maybe kind of getting behind or getting an insight behind what I've been doing as an artist and my journey. Really quickly, I just want to get some things out of the way. I want to give a big shout out to Community Arts of Elmira, who's hosting this event. I found that they are one of the driving forces, and I want to say they're not the only force, but one of the driving forces behind arts and in the community of Elmira and in the area. Big shout out to any other organization that's pushing the arts in Elmira. Without you guys, we as artists would have a harder time getting out there and finding a place to express ourselves. So I'm here today. My name's Sam. I go by the name SOMO how I tag my artworks. And I'm here today to give you a presentation that I've entitled Staying Inspired and Pushing the Needle Forward. So the reason why I chose that title and why I'm kind of beginning the talk with this is something that I've struggled to do over the years is kind of stay inspired and find out where exactly I want to push myself, my endeavors, my efforts, and most importantly, my art. And I think, kind of more generally speaking, I think it's vitally important for anybody, whether you're an artist or a creator or just a mom and dad or a normal human being. I think it's vitally important to stay inspired simply because that's really what gets us through every single day that we wake up. It's being able to find wonder and curiosity in the world and putting your name on that curiosity. I think that's something that's really important. So how important is it? It's very important. So I'm starting off with a quote by one of my favorite philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche. He might have kind of a spotty history as far as public relations, but as you'll find, he is a very preeminent philosopher who's thought a lot about the same things that we think about, but even deeper. And the quote that I'm choosing is, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." So I chose the quote because amongst myself and my friends and my family, usually if we're going out in a group, maybe on a vacation or something, it was always me that was kind of lagging back, staring at leaves on the ground, or pulling out my phone, or just looking at things and inspecting things and talking about the wonder of things. I would see, I remember times when I'd go to New York City with my family for Thanksgiving, and I was standing next to garbage cans that were overflowing on the corner. And my mom or my brother would say, "What are you doing? Why are you looking at that?" And I thought it was beautiful. Maybe that's something that kind of is innate in me, but I think really if everyone takes the time out to take a step back and look at how crazy and beautiful and strange our existence is every single day, you'll be able to kind of approach life with a little bit of wonder. So in that regard, one slide back, please. So in that regard, my artistic interests kind of vary. I mean, I love painting and drawing, but I love photography. I'm kind of, getting my feet wet in video making, but this is a video that I made earlier this year, around February, in the middle of the pandemic. I was bored, so I made this video, and if you'd like to click it, this is a 5-minute video. Pacing's like on and off, but just sit back, relax, and check this one out. This is just as a side note, I learned so much making this video. There's so much free software out there now as far as video editing. We have great cameras in our pocket every day. And put the sounds on. So I'll just tell you a little backdrop on the video, actually. So, I mean, obviously it's me sitting on a porch, kicking a tire around. Why? I don't know. But it was more because I had a lot of free time on a given day. None of my friends really wanted to hang out with me, and I said, well, I'm just going to make this video. So I just really thought of, a narrative as I was, this literally just all came to me, at 8 in the morning when I woke up, and I'd been watching video editing videos on YouTube the night before, and there's so many great resources. One, this is a plug for a YouTube channel that I really love. It's called This Guy Edits, and he goes through and he breaks down all of the popular movie scenes. Dallas, you know about it? All of the popular movie scenes that you've seen, and it really just gives you a whole new look at how movies are made. Typically, when you're watching a movie, it's comprised of scenes, but as a viewer, you're not thinking about where the cameras are, or how the video's edited, and how many different scenes that you got to put together. The movies are really just packaged for the viewer to just consume like really easily and without any friction. So this guy edits. He inspired me to make this video, and I was just really playing around with camera positioning, different scenes, and the way that I would cut and jump cut things. So I woke up 8 in the morning that morning, and I said, I'm going to make a video. What's this going to be about? And I figured, I don't know. I got to make, when you start thinking about story and narrative is something that people have been blessed with for millennia, since the very beginning of civilization. Before people could read or write, they passed, stories amongst each other around, a fire or something like that. So stories are just very simple. A good story is something that isn't too complicated. And that's what I came up with. I said, I'm just going to drag this tire. This tire is in the back of my truck. Those are just some props that I had back there. And the cool thing, unfortunately you guys aren't going to be able to hear the sound, but check out my YouTube channel. I have this posted on there. Sound design was actually a really cool part of this, which I don't have any music playing, but I had the mic playing or recording, and you can hear the jangle of the chain and the dragging of the tire, and it really, you don't really think about sound until you start having to apply it to scenes. And I would say it's 60% of a movie is sound. You see these scenes, but every time I set up a scene, I was picking up my phone. I was using a tripod with my phone, and I was just jumping around and setting up a new scene. All kind of being cohesive because of the narrative of me pulling a tire. So there's this element right here that kind of adds a twist to me dragging a tire. And you'll see that the character discovers something else in the world. It turns out to be a Shrek doll, just laying out in the barren tundra of an Elmira winter, out in the yard. And for some reason, he doesn't seem to think that it's a child's, or he doesn't want to give it back to whoever owns it. So finders keepers. And it was just a really fun thing for me to just kind of play around with and toy with, because I really can't stress this enough. If you have a creative bone in your body, I think we live in the best time in any era that humans have ever been around to be able to create. And I mean, we have literally a pocket supercomputer in our pocket that can capture audio and video. We have all of the resources right at our fingertips with YouTube and the internet in general. And if you just take a little bit of time and wonder and curiosity and being inspired, you can kind of put something like this together. And I was very proud of that. So I think that's the end of that, and you could probably go to the next slide, please. So I was really, really proud of that. I just want to say that a lot of the art that I create, I really just want to create it for myself. And I want to it becomes this addictive feeling of creating the art and looking back and saying, I really enjoy this, I created this. And if you can surprise yourself in the art that you can create, then I think at the base level, that's all that really matters. If you get other people to take notice, that's kind of a plus. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of segue into the rest of what the art talk is going to be about. I'm just going to talk a little bit about me and then touch on a few points of how I kind of got to where I am today. So about me, I've always, well, let me take a step back. I'm from Elmira. I was actually born in the Philippines, but I was raised here. I came here at the age of 1. And I went to all of the elementary schools and high schools, and it was just a really great time here in Elmira. But I was always the kid in class that could draw things. As far back as I can remember, 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, I was, during downtimes in class, my fingers were always busy. I could never be bored because I always had a blank canvas and a pencil or a blank piece of paper that might have had some margins because I was supposed to be taking notes or something. And I was always just doodling and drawing. I found some boxes of old elementary school paperwork down in my basement not too long ago, and all of my math homework, my English homework, everything just had doodles on it, and it was just this compulsion. And I heard not too long ago that doodling for people in general helps some people to concentrate better. It's just keeping something, and that's exactly why I did it. It helped me, open up my ears and kind of listen to what was going on. So if anyone has me in class and they're the instructor, please do not think that I'm ignoring you. I'm actually listening very intently while I'm doodling. So I was always the guy, the kid that could draw things, and naturally, because I had an inclination to draw, I loved comic books. I think that's where the story starts for me for art, and I just always, anytime, this was back in the day when you'd go to the grocery store and they still had magazines and a full aisle of magazines and comic books. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find that in any store anymore nowadays, but that was the thing that I would tell my mom where I was going. I would say, hey, Mom, you're going to go shop. I'm going to go to the magazine section, and I would just be pouring through magazines and comic books. Just as a side note, I really love the printed form. I love holding imagery in my hands. I love reading things in my hands. And I think for the longest time, I used to buy the newspaper, and for the longest time, even once we started getting smartphones, I said, I'll never stop buying the newspaper. Unfortunately, the past few years, I stopped because, there's just something, there's a force behind convenience. But, so the comic books were a great thing. I loved all the natural comic books, Spider-Man, X-Men. But then as I got a little older, I found this brand of comics called Image. There's Marvel, DC, and then there's Image Comics, and then a whole host of other comics. But Image Comics they were a little edgier. They were, the colors popped a little more, but there was a lot more black within the frames. And incidentally, the creators of Image Comics were former artists for Marvel and DC that didn't think that they had as much creative freedom as that they wanted to in terms of storytelling. And if you pick up a comic book, and I suggest that everyone go to their local comic book retailer, Heroes Your Mom Threw Out on 14th Street, and pick up a comic book and just really, take a step back and appreciate the visual storytelling that's happening within every single panel. Because a really good comic, at least in my opinion, will be able to tell you the story without the word bubbles. And you pick it up and you can kind of put together what's going on and what's going to happen. So Image Comics, these artists like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, they were all artists for like Spider-Man and everything like that, and they had this new style that had a lot of lines, a lot of details. It was a lot more expressive. They started their own comic book company. It was called Image Comics, and then I got into what my favorite comic at the time was Spawn. I have probably every single issue of Spawn that's out. Actually, I stopped collecting it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but Spawn was a comic that I'd never seen before. The protagonist was an African-American man, and he was a guy who made a deal with the devil to come back and see his wife. And when he came back to see his wife, he realized that he came back in the form of a hellspawn, which is this, this otherworldly being. But there was the greatest thing about that narrative is that he was kind of an anti-hero because he was a hellspawn, so he comes back into the world and he was never a hero, and he doesn't really want to be a hero. He really just wants to see his wife, someone that he lost when he died. But instead of going on a tangent about that, I really love Spawn, and that's, I think, when I started to really understand the power of capturing an image and then telling a story. And the one thing that I always did, because I was always drawing people, Batman and Spider-Man, is I just worked on copying things. I copied, art panels, and I copied, posters, and then I started drawing, my pet parrot, and I started drawing things from real life. And I got so good at that now I'm at the point where I feel 100% confident in my ability to be able to render something that's in front of me. And it's mostly because I just always wanted to draw and really just mimic my idols. And, so, and incidentally, if one goes to art school, that's kind of one of the basic things that they teach you in the beginning art classes is to do a study of a famous painting or a famous drawing. And doing a study essentially is copying it. But what copying does is it puts you through the motion of the original artist, and it allows you to feel what their strokes are like. And then once your body gets used to that and that way of looking at things, then you can kind of take ownership of it yourself. So that's basically what it is about me, but actually the one last thing that I want to touch on about myself before I go into some of these points is my story here with community arts and doing some commissioned murals for the city started about 3 or 4 years ago when I moved back to the area from Indianapolis. I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana for a few years, about 4 years, and I had to come back to Elmira for a few reasons, and much to my chagrin, honestly, if I were to be frank, I came back here. I remember I pulled into my driveway and I said, I don't really want to be here. And I think anyone can kind of attest to that feeling of being in a place that you might not be so enthusiastic about being in. But so me being me, I like to make lemonade out of lemons. I asked myself some really deep questions. I asked myself, what exactly do I want to do here aside from getting a job and maybe carving out the rest of the next few years of my life? And I told myself, you know what, I'm going to really focus on my art. And when I decided on that kind of statement, I would really want to focus on my art, I had to make that statement a little less abstract. So in Indianapolis, one of the things that I was doing was I was teaching small business owners and truckers how to kind of jumpstart their small business. And one of the things that I would teach them in class was to make any goal that you're setting, you have to break it down into micro bits. So if I said I want to focus on my art, I have to ask myself how. What's that going to look like? What am I going to do tomorrow morning to help me focus on my art? Once I decided that, I said, you know what, I'm going to make art and try to display it in a gallery. Make art and try to display it in a show. Oops, sorry about that. So once I decided to make art, that really just opened the doors for me to really kind of focus on what I wanted to do. And that's exactly it. I told myself I want to make art and I want to display it for the public, which I had done before here and there. I had drawn commissioned portraits for people here and there, but mostly, I was making art for myself, and thankfully, because of this modern age, I could post it online or something like that. But I really wanted to take it to the next level. So what I did was, I told myself that I had to create a body of work and reach out to the community and find out what organizations were out there that would help me do this. Because the alternative was maybe knocking on the door of a coffee shop, which Elmira didn't really have too many at the time, or just a restaurant or something and saying, hey, can I hang up some of my pieces? So that would be the alternative. But the other way to approach it is to look for organizations in the community. And nowadays, it's so easy. I just Googled art, Elmira, and that's it. And one of the first things that popped up was Community Arts of Elmira. And I'm just fortunate that, I didn't have this inclination 10 years ago, because I don't think you guys were here. So I found Community Arts of Elmira. I found artists like Philomena Jack. I found artists like Chris Eldred. These are all artists that, I saw being showcased in community arts, and I said, I think this might be my stepping stone. So I reached out to them, and kind of the rest is history. So, actually, before you change the slide, I'm sorry. So I want to touch on a few points on what kind of helped me through that journey. One of the first things that I did when I decided that I wanted to focus on my art was I had to look at it with the thirst of a student. And I really fundamentally believe that if you want to do anything, if it's anything else aside from art, if you want to build a shed or something like that, you really have to approach it with the thirst of a student, like you know nothing about it. And thankfully we have YouTube for that. So what I did was I said, what's the best way to come at this topic that I really thought I knew so much about? I felt like I knew so much about drawing that I couldn't learn anymore. But that was something that I learned through art history. So I just went to YouTube and I made sure that I just typed in, artists that I'd heard about in the past. Van Gogh, Picasso. These are all names that are in the collective conscious and that we all know, but we don't really know them, past the surface level. And, as any kind of rabbit hole through, wonder will take you, you will springboard from one thing to another, to another, to another, until you get a kind of a bigger form of that concept in your head. So art history was the way that I approached how I was going to focus on my art. This says from Bosch to Basquiat, YouTube is your endless friend. The next thing that I'm going to touch on after the art history portion is my technique and insight. Essentially, really what I did was relearn art and relearn on how to be more free with it, more fluid with it. I learned how to be a kid again with art. And then I want to touch on the first steps of what I did to kind of take my art to the next level and reach out to the community, to the community. So you can change the slide there. So from Bosch to Basquiat, I have a tip here. And this image is an image of Basquiat outdoors, and you can see one of his paintings. You can see the broad strokes and kind of the strong colors, and he has this smile on his face that I really feels it captures his wonder for art. And I really urge anyone who's interested in anything art to look up the story of Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was an artist that lived for only a very short time. He died of an overdose in his late 20s. But I have a tip here. I said, don't be afraid to go down a rabbit hole of wonder. It is this type of wonder that allows you to become a part of what you are seeking. So there. So I just wanted to highlight for anyone that might not know too much about art history, kind of, the sequence of how I kind of learned other artists. I want to make a caveat here. I don't know that much about art history, but I do know that if you start Googling things, you'll pull up a lot of artists. Another caveat is this might focus a lot on male artists, Western artists, but this is more my experience and how the sequence and how I learned them, but once you find these artists, you'll find that there's so many artists that influence them all around the world. Eastern art, men and women influencing each other. So this photo here is of a painting done by Hieronymus Bosch. He was a Dutch artist from the 15th century or 16th century, so about the 1500s. And he was one of the first artists who broke away from classical paintings of religious figures to make something surreal. If you ever look him up, you'll see that he makes these large paintings of this crazy world of demons and goblins and fairies and everything like that. That was a new name to me. That was an absolutely new name to me. And he doesn't have too many surviving works, but what you will read about him was that his art was a departure from what was already there. The next artist that I want to highlight is J.M.W. Turner. I believe he was a British artist right around the late 1800s. The crazy thing about Turner, and what really drew me to him, other than he has an entire museum named for himself, is that he was one of the artists, and I could be wrong about this, that started dabbling with the world of abstract visualization. So prior to this, in the mid-1800s and everything like that, there was, it was about capturing photorealistic pictures of the natural world. Because, photography and cameras didn't quite exist by then. But J.M.W. Turner, a lot of his paintings were of seascapes, and if you can kind of see, he makes the sky, and this is like a bay here with ships. They're more shapes. They're more just kind of forms that it looks like his brush didn't really want to define. He just kind of put them on there and let you, the viewer, put together what that image was. The next artist that I want to talk about is de Kooning, Willem de Kooning. He was one of the, forefathers of abstraction, and he existed in the early 1900s around the Great Depression, and as you can see, it looks like, a child's painting. And I don't say that as anything derogatory, but it's just, in this, I think the name of this piece is called Portrait of a Woman. And it's just, I don't know if it even looks like a woman, but you can tell it's a figure, but you can just see that this artist completely redefined for himself and the rest of the world what figure painting is. And as I'm going through these people, and I'm watching YouTube videos about these people, I'm really just redefining what I think art is. Because I had this, I really had this kind of narrow view that art is, comic books and well-defined forms of people and things like that. But once I started learning about the abstractionists, like de Kooning and like Mondrian here, who is, I think this is a picture of a tree. This is all stuff that, everyone has some familiarity with it, but for me, who was going through the journey of relearning what art is and deconstructing what I know, this became a mind-blowing moment for me. And it sounds like an overstatement, but it really was. Francis Bacon was an artist around the middle of the 1900s. I think he was a Scottish or Irish artist. Let me back this up. So one of the things that I Google searched when I was checking out art again was the world's most expensive paintings. Okay, so that's a little secret, and that's where I started. And, I have no shame for that, because sometimes you don't know where to start, and that's where I started. Well, these are going to be the most heralded artists out here, and it's for a reason. It's not to kind of undermine anyone that hasn't sold millions of dollars worth of paintings, but it's more to just see what these guys were doing that set them apart from everyone else. Francis Bacon is one of my favorite artists because he came at a time where there was a lot of psychoanalytical thought about the human mind. He was a notorious drunk who just, he went to the bar beneath his apartment. He would get wasted, have a great time with his friends, and then go up into his art studio above the bar at all hours of the night. If you look at pictures of his studio, it is the nastiest studio. It looks like just piles of garbage and paint everywhere. But he created these works of art that they just resonate with the imagery of the human mind. And then another artist actually that I just discovered a couple years ago was Hilma af Klint. I think she was a Swedish artist in the early 1900s who art historians really just started discovering her work and elevating her work because she was an abstractionist. Before the abstractionists came around, people were still painting pictures of railroads and landscapes and everything like that. And here she's painting pictures of swooping circles and everything's flat. But check her out. She's a really great artist. She was part of a group of women called The Five, and they all believed in theosophy. I won't get into that, but it's a really great rabbit hole to get into. So I see that my time's running out a little bit, so I'm going to kind of speed through a couple of these. If you can go to the next slide, please. Just a few more artists that really inspired me, and I'm taking some time to go through this because this really was my journey. It was my journey of wonder and discovering what art really could be. This is a painting by Philip Guston. I think that's a mid-1900s artist, but the thing that attracted me to him was his art was kind of childish too. And I have to stress that I don't say that in a derogatory manner, but his art, it was a little subversive. It wasn't what was going on at the time, or it wasn't what was kind of in vogue at the time, but I just really loved his art. George Condo is a contemporary artist. He's alive today. He just had a show in New York City not too long ago. One of his, some of his pieces were the cover for Kanye West's album Dark Twisted Fantasy. I just really love his story, and as you can tell, it's abstract. I don't know what this is. And then finally, really the artist that kind of just sparked the fire in my interest was Basquiat. His story is really great because he just blew up on the New York art scene in the 80s. The New York art scene was just dominated by, fine art. And New York art scene was also dominated by this bubbling street art movement. And he was a graffiti artist, he was a writer, he was a tagger. But then he elevated himself to become one of the highest selling artists in the world. And as you can see, he just had this free style where it led to speed in his process, but it also led to the fact that he was only making art for about 8 or 9 years, and he came up with 10,000 pieces. I might have some of the numbers wrong, but you get the idea. He was just prolific, and then he died, and that sucks. But yeah, that's actually, that was my journey, and along with so many other artists, it really helped galvanize kind of how I wanted to approach art. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is a photo of one of my art pieces in a collector's home, and as you can see, it's very expressionistic. I do remember the day that I was making that. The thing about my technique and my style is I never finish a painting in one sitting or 2 sittings or even in one spell. I'll take a painting and I'll do what I do with it, and it'll just sit. I have paintings in the corner of my house right now that I don't know if I'll ever get back to, but then one day I'll take it back out. And that was something that Willem de Kooning did a lot. That painting of the woman that didn't look like a woman, that took him 4 years. It looks like it took him 2 minutes, but so a little bit about my technique. So once I realized that art could be a little more free, that it could be a little more expressionistic, that it could be impulsive, I started making art that way. And one of the things that helped me was, to have a few drinks. And I'll tell you, if you really want to kind of free yourself up and mess up your lines and make sure that you can't draw anything, have a few drinks. And then maybe you'll surprise yourself. So that's what I did. This is kind of a joke that I tell a few people, a few of my friends. A lot of the art that I had in my first solo show here at Community Arts, I was drunk. I mean, not that drunk. I had, maybe, I don't know. But so what it helped to do really was to help show myself what I could do being more free, because I knew I could always go back to a more refined style. I knew I could always visit that, and you know, you really have to get that style down before you can deconstruct it and become more free. And I think, let me see here, sorry about that. So for the sake of time, if we can go to the next slide. So one thing that I kind of just want to impart on everybody is, what are the first steps that you want to take if, let's say, very specifically, if you want to get your art out there? I really want to say, I've got a tip here. Coming to the decision of what it is that you actually want is usually harder than actually starting. But once you've decided, the path and the steps toward it become clearer. So I think the most important thing about taking a first step or going down the path is deciding what exactly you want to do. Because once you make the decision, it'll be much easier to commit. It'll be harder to fall to distraction or, you know, find temptation in another path. So one of the first steps that I did was I sent an email to Community Arts, and that email, at this point, I had done a couple of steps prior. I had created a small body of work. I think I had made 10 paintings. And I said, okay, I have 10 paintings that I can present to these people that I'm going to reach out to. So I sent an email that had those 10 paintings attached to it. And, you know, naturally, because I was in the depths of painting, I had a few drinks. And in the subject line, in all caps, I wrote, "How do I become one of your artists?" Sent it out. No response. Naturally, you know. For 2 or 3 months, no response. But, you know, at that point, that's the thing. I didn't have all of my eggs in one basket. I didn't think, you know, I've got to get a response from these people, because I had kind of few other ways that I was going to get my art out there. So I did it. I didn't overthink it. And then one day I got a call from Community Arts, and they wanted to talk. So I think the greatest thing about kind of that lesson for me is, you know, you shoot your shot, and you just, but before you shoot your shot, I don't want to say that hastily, make sure you come prepared. Because if you shoot your shot, and then someone responds, and then you don't really have kind of follow-up or anything really to give to them, then you've wasted that shot. So make sure that you come in prepared, that, you know, you put yourself in their shoes, and imagine if, you know, if you came up to them, the questions that you'd want to ask them. So actually, can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm kind of being a little disjointed here, but part of this talk was to talk about the art of graffiti. Now, I want to make a disclaimer. I cannot do graffiti. I'd love to do graffiti. I'm going to learn how to do graffiti. And when I talk about graffiti, I'm talking about the large, elaborate pieces that you see on the side of the trains that make you stop for a second and say, oh my gosh, look at the color combinations, look at the angles, look at the lines. I can't do that, but there are really great graffiti artists out there who have translated their work from the streets into fine art galleries. You can look up Banksy and Cause and just a whole slew of artists. So I'm not really going to talk about graffiti as a practitioner, but graffiti as more of an actual piece of art. So what I'd like to do is, and the reason why I'm talking about it is it's kind of in the context of public art in general. You know, prior to graffiti, there were the large muralists in the early 1900s that were commissioned to paint murals all over the cities. And then graffiti came around, and it was kind of viewed as a form of vandalism, which in essence, it really is a form of vandalism. But with graffiti, there's this world of unspoken code. Graffiti is like a sport for the practitioners. So what I'd like to do is have you guys view a short video, and it gives you kind of a primer on how to view graffiti and what it's about. So we're just going to let this play in the background while I talk about it. So I think now where we are in art and how we view graffiti has kind of matured to the point where if anyone that knows anything about art, or if you're just a casual observer, you can tell that graffiti is art. Okay, if you look at even the vandalistic looking graffiti where it's just a kind of a written swoop, in those circles, that graffiti, you writing your name SOMO like really fast with one line and it took you 2 seconds, that is something that has intent. That artist designed that look, and that artist homogenized that look and replicated that look so that if you get into the world of graffiti, you will see artists that have a very kind of brand-looking tag, and so this is actually highlighting some artists that were on the graffiti scene in the early '80s that evolved to become fine artists, and they're making great livings doing that. But so as far as graffiti and murals are concerned, I think there's been tension across the country of how they can coexist in the same space. And I think this goes along with the rising emergence of muraling across the country. I can tell you, at least from personal experience, 5 or 10 years ago, if you typed in mural into Google, you might see a mural from one city here, another city there. But if you do it now, you're going to find that these cities conduct mural festivals. They dedicate a portion of their budget, or they find a budget to make sure that they create murals within their city. And that's testament to art itself. People are hungry for art. In a more utilitarian standpoint, a large, beautiful mural can bring up the value, or at least the perceived value, of a rundown building. So if you're a developer and if you have property, and $20,000 can only maybe fix your drywall, while $20,000 on the side of your outside of your building can have a lot more impact. So at least for us here in Elmira, I think the challenge that we had is that since we were kind of pushing for murals, that we came to this crossroads with the graffiti artists who started kind of cropping up around the same time. So I think really kind of the message that I want to talk about with graffiti and art is that you can't undermine or downplay the value of graffiti, because it really is just another craftsman trying to display their work. And any true graffiti artist, and I speak as a novice, follows some unwritten rules. And if you look it up, you can look up some unwritten rules. Universities have done some research on just graffiti art in general, but some of the unwritten rules are: you never paint on private property. You never paint on things like statues or grave sites. You never paint on a car. And you also never paint over someone else's graffiti. So unless it's better than the other person's graffiti. So it's really a fun world. It's a world that kind of toes the line of being illegal. So I think a lot of the older graffiti artists have realized that they still want to create great art, but they have to do it in a way that it's not going to send them in jail, and also a way that's going to give them some sort of a livelihood. So I think the natural progression of any really good graffiti artist is to kind of work on both sides of the lines of legality, and create art that people can buy. So I think we're running out of time. I'd like to talk a little bit about the murals that I have up in Elmira. So if we can just end this video and go to the next slide. So I have 4 murals in Elmira, and these are all murals that I work with community arts to kind of put up. And I really suggest that anyone who's viewing this live stream, if you're interested in public art or creating a mural in Elmira, come to community arts, have an idea, have a location that you might want to put that art up, and have a game plan. Because it's a little different from saying, hey, I would like to draw this or paint this beautiful piece on this wall. Well, this goes back to kind of honing in on the steps of achieving your goal. Because if you don't have it defined for yourself, then how is an organization that you're working with going to be able to translate that? So come prepared, reach out to a community or to your local organization and get to work. So this one's called World of Wonder. It's located on Judson Street, right around the walking tunnel there. And this is a digital mock-up that I had of that piece. So this was my first ever mural. And although I was excited, I was also very nervous because, I was always working on a piece of paper or a small canvas. But prior to this, I had done my research. I had watched other murals. There's one muralist an artist that I really loved. His name's 1000. If you check him out on YouTube, I actually kind of followed his ascent with him. I remember when he first started, he was making videos talking about getting subscribers, and now he's got tons of subscribers, and he's just really taking off his work. But the reason why I talk about him is 1000, I think, was one of the first muralists on YouTube to talk about a technique called doodle gridding. Now, if you go to this particular mural now, you'll see the kid in a blue bunny suit sitting there. But I had to ask myself, how am I going to get that kid in a blue bunny suit that's on this piece of paper or on my computer up on this wall, on this piece? There's a technique for that, and it's called doodle gridding. And it's similar to just kind of block gridding when you want to scale up your work. But 1000 talks about that, and now if you look it up, I think it's kind of a mainstay for many artists to kind of scale up the work. But essentially what you do is you just draw a bunch of doodles on the actual piece, or on the actual wall, and then you take a picture of that doodled wall, and then you overlay your design on top of those doodles. So then you're finally looking at the merged image that'll help you kind of scale that picture up. So I had a lot of fun with that. To be honest, when I first started talking about the mock-up design for this mural, I was asking myself, what can I get away with as far as putting up a mural that's city commissioned? I don't know. And I figured this was the kind of the first design that I had. My second design was a little more mundane. It was going to be fields and streams and stuff like that. But I said, maybe I'll just send them a picture of a guy in a blue bunny suit and see what they said. And once they said yeah, I said, oh, we're off to the races. So that one was really fun. This next one that I did subsequent to that was called Commuter Silhouette. And this is a really interesting story behind this one. Because if you go to visit that one that's on Washington Ave, kind of on the corner of Washington Ave and Clemens Center Parkway, you'll see it's just a bunch of black silhouettes over a white background. I chose that for simplicity's sake and kind of just a graphic appeal. There's cars that are driving by really fast, and black and white catches eyes pretty nicely. So I created this. It's a bunch of silhouettes. There's a woman walking her dog and a man pushing his kid in a stroller and people riding their bikes. But the story of this, it gets kind of on a serious note, is that this was being done in the middle of the pandemic last year, about September, October. But it was also in the middle of the protests around America due to social injustice and police brutality. So people were already on edge. Everyone was on level 10 as far as having their opinions about the situation. So I was outlining this first figure, as you can see here. And as you can see, it's an outline of a boy. And it's a boy maybe kind of turning over his shoulder because his mom's calling him, or something like that. And I'm outlining it, and then I started painting it black, because that's what a silhouette is, right? It's black. But I had some, members of the community yell out how crappy that image was, how crappy this mural was. And it only happened twice. And let me just say, I had 98% of the people that saw me doing this gave me praise and said, this is great, this looks beautiful. But, taking in the context of the time and what we were going through, I could tell that there were people that were, maybe just a little blinded by some old ways of thinking. Because I had the last laugh for them. We all had the last laugh. It wasn't a black boy that I was painting, and it could have been, but it was a silhouette. So it's about, do you really want to rush to judgment and make yourself look that foolish, or do you want to just kind of wait and let things play out and make sure that you do your own homework before you jump out and look like a fool? But that was a really fun piece. I didn't use any grid lines for that. Actually, I used just like chips in the paint of my image to be, or of the actual wall to kind of scale that one up. And then I'm going to go ahead and highlight my last two murals. Thank you. So these are digital mock-ups of the murals that I'm currently working on at the opening of the Lackawanna Rail Trail, located on Water Street across from Kennedy Valve. As you can see, the one thing that I really learned during the pandemic, in the beginning of it, when everyone was locked down and couldn't leave their house, I always told myself for years that I was going to learn Photoshop, and I did. I'm proud of myself that I did. But I'm not very good at it, but I'm good enough to be able to kind of carry out these simple things of creating digital mock-ups. And I'll tell you, in mural creation, I think they're indispensable because it allows you to really see your image overlaid on the final wall, and it just visually it gives you a lot of things to work with. So these were my digital mock-ups, and I really wanted to kind of talk about or portray a narrative about the flood of 1972 that happened in Elmira. And if you go down to the trail, you'll see that the trail kind of swoops around, and you'll walk past this image here, and then you'll walk around, because that image is on that side, this image is on that side, and you'll walk around and you'll see these houses. Now, what's kind of implicated here, if you don't know anything about the flood of 72, you'll just see that it's a house and maybe people sitting on it. But if you put it together, it kind of tells a story of, this right here are two people sitting on the rooftop, the peak of a rooftop, looking at the moon. It kind of implies that there's something wrong down at the bottom. Maybe it's flooded with water, but they're looking at the moon. They're making the best out of the situation. They're having a good time, and they're kind of looking at the future with hope. These murals were my largest by far. Anything that I usually get anxious and scared about, I try to flip it in my head and get excited. Kind of like this talk, I was a little anxious. I was really anxious about it, but I tricked myself and said, yeah, I'm going to kill this thing. So that's what I did with this. I approached this giant wall, which actually, if I want to back up just for a quick second, this wall right here had the tag of a local graffiti artist that goes by the name of Snab, S-N-A-B. And it was a beautiful piece, but it was a piece that invaded personally a wall that I'd been looking at for 3 years, that I had kind of worked and gone through the bureaucracy to paint on. But the one thing that I made sure that I did as a fellow artist was I reached out to Snab. We found each other on Instagram, and I reached out to him and started a dialogue. And I made sure that he knew that this wasn't a form of disrespect. This was just, me wanting to paint on a wall, and we could coexist with each other and collaborate with each other, and maybe kind of create this relationship and dynamic between street art and public art and graffiti and murals. So please go down to that area, because not only are my murals there, Snab's throwies and pieces are down there as well, so check those out. Really great, vibrant colors. But yeah, I'm currently working on these. I'll probably, when I leave here, hopefully finish this one up. But these are really fun. They're big. My calves are sore because I go up and down the ladder a lot doing that. But I think that's going to wrap it up for me. So yeah, thank you so much for all joining and indulging me in listening to me talk. Check me out at Somostrada on Instagram, and then this is my website, which has to be updated, but check it out. I'll let you guys know when it gets updated. So thank you very much.